Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Based on today's title, let's talk about it. So I received a couple of comments asking about my condition, the condition that led me to becoming a Jehovah's Witness. That condition is called achalasia. In lamest terms, achalasia, it basically my esophagus was closing. It prevented me from eating and drinking eventually, but it was a progressive state in which I couldn't eat or drink. So it started when I was about 18 or 19 years old. I began taking diet pills to lose weight, but I noticed that when taking diet pills, I began having heartburn. I never experienced heartburn prior to me taking diet pills. So, of course, I stopped taking the diet pills. However, the heartburn continued. Then I started to notice other things about my body, particularly eating and drinking. It became difficult for me to eat foods. Initially, I thought that maybe I'm taking too big of a bites or I need to slow down or I was eating too fast. But it continued to progress to the point that I became afraid. I was vomiting. Oftentimes, I was vomiting in my sleep because the food wasn't digesting properly. So I went to my primary doctor to figure out what was going on. He ran tests were ran. However, he couldn't figure out what was going on with me. So I was referred to a intestinal specialist. I believe I pronounced that right. I'm not sure, but for sure the GI specialist. So the GI specialist, he ran tests. I had taken a barium, some type of thick liquid I had to consume so that they can perform an x-ray to see how the drink enters my body from my throat, my mouth, my throat to my esophagus, leading down to the stomach, and how long that takes. So that was performed, and that's when it was determined that I had achalasia. So I was seeing this doctor for some time, a number of months. He attempted with every solution at the time. I had in and out procedures with the GI specialist attempting to stretch out my esophagus to allow food and drink to enter easily. That was temporary fixes. I had maybe between 3 to 5 procedures such as that. It didn't work. My condition progressed so much that eventually I couldn't eat or drink. I lost so much weight. It was very unhealthy. As I mentioned, I was constantly throwing up, or vomiting, I should say, vomiting. I was fainting, um, and I was weak and I was tired because I wasn't eating. I wasn't getting nutrients. I was just in a bad situation at that young of an age. It just wasn't good. And that was my first time being sick. Growing up, I had the common cold. I had the wingworms maybe 3 times or so. I caught the chicken pox when I was 16 or 17 years old for the first time and only time. So I didn't consider myself to be a sick person or a sickly person. But this occurred, they said it was hereditary. However, I don't know anyone in my family who has this condition or who ever experienced symptoms such as this. So I was on my own, trying to figure out things and making sure I go to the right doctors and so forth. So back to the GI specialist, he performed a number of between 3 and 5 procedures attempting to stretch out my esophagus. They were temporary, lasted maybe a day or two. Within that time, I mentioned I couldn't eat. I had trouble eating as well as drinking water. I couldn't. It got to the point I couldn't even digest water. Water would come back up. Food and water would come back up. However, because I wasn't getting the nutrients, when the specialist did the procedures with the stretching out my esophagus, he did have me drink Ensure supplement so I could get some minerals in me. But that was short lived. Maybe a day or two I can do so. But when my esophagus began closing back up, that too will come up as well. So eventually, after the last procedure he did, attempting to stretch out my esophagus, I remember being in his office. He looked me right in my eyes and said, "I can't do anything else for you. If you do not have surgery," he said, "I guarantee you within 4 to 6 months you'll be dead." mind you, during this time frame, he was telling me about surgery, but I didn't want surgery. I was afraid, and because I was afraid of surgery. I was afraid of them cutting on me. I was afraid of going under the knife, so to speak. So I didn't want it. I didn't want surgery initially. And I was hoping that those in and out procedures with him stretching out my esophagus would work, but it didn't work. So he had that heart to heart conversation with me. I knew he was serious, and I felt awful. I knew he was absolute correct. I didn't know about the of course I didn't know about the time frame that I will have remaining to live if I didn't have the surgery. But I knew I was in dire straits at that point. So he referred me to a surgeon. I met the surgeon right away. The surgeon mentioned to me he's performed this procedure, this operation several times. However, there's a slight chance that something will happen, maybe like a 5% chance, but it was like a 95% success rate. Fine, I was okay with that. Went to the hospital. Well, let me back up. Of course, this time frame, I moved up my parents' home. I was on my own, but I was providing my parents with the details regarding what was going on with me health wise. My parents, they are warriors, so I was terrified already with my own negative thoughts and so forth, and added to their negative thoughts, I was just terrified. My mom kept talking about the resurrection and not to take any blood, to get life water. I didn't know what life water was. and I was just terrified. So I didn't want that added pressure. And so I opted the day of the surgery to take myself to the hospital. I wanted to be positive much as possible. I was scared, but I wanted to be as positive as I possibly can. And so I went to the hospital on my own, checked in. They placed the bracelet on me with my name and my date of birth. And I recall that the orderly who was transporting me to the operating room, he said that he looked at my bracelet, my bracelet. He said, I will visit you after your surgery. I said, okay, well, didn't think anything of it. Later that day, I heard two different stories at this point. My parents mentioned to me after the fact that they called to check on me because I went by myself. They were speaking with the surgeon, and over the loudspeaker, they heard code blue. My surgeon, dropped the phone. Later, my parents hung up, and they rushed to the hospital. That code was for me. I coded blue, and I didn't ask all the questions with the surgery. I thought I was grown. I knew everything. 5% chance I would have anything. 95% success rate. But the surgery. This is how the surgery took place. I was on my stomach, so the incision is made through my back. I have a beauty mark, a scar in my back from the surgery. They entered my back, and the reason for entering my back was because the surgeon said I was a female. He didn't want, I shouldn't have any. He didn't want any scars on my chest. I agreed. So they made the incision through my back. In order to get to my esophagus from my back, they had to deflate my lungs. So that was the complication that came about. They had, and to get to my esophagus, what the procedure was to shave the bones on both sides of my esophagus so that food and drink can pass by easily. In order to do that, from my back to my esophagus, they deflated my lungs. And after the surgery was complete, whereas they shaved down the bones to both sides of my esophagus, there was a trouble with inflating my lungs so that I can breathe on my own or breathe properly. That was the code blue. They resuscitated me. I survived. I recall being in the ICU. I don't know how long. I know I couldn't speak because I woke up and I couldn't breathe. And thankfully, there was a janitor there collecting trash. And I alerted him by wailing my hands and my feet. He alerted the nurses or a nurse, and she came to adjust my breathing. So I recall that. I don't know how long I was in ICU. I just remember also another instance whereas my parents was at the hospital visiting me. My mom was holding my hand, and my dad he had tears in his eyes. And I said, "What's wrong with you?" I didn't know I had all these tubes hooked up to me. but I can speak at that time. They took whatever was in my mouth. I was able to speak. He said nothing, but I did later realize I had all these tubes on me, which was probably terrifying for my parents. And if I would have saw myself, I probably would have been terrified. So fast forward, I'm out of ICU. I'm in a room. Um, the orderly came to visit me. As he stated, he brought some nice balloons and some candy, I think a little bear. And he mentioned to me, "So you scared me." I said, "How so?" He said, "You coded blue." That's the first time I knew that it was a code blue on me. But I didn't know what code blue meant until the orderly explained it to me, that I actually died. That's what it means. And come to find out, they couldn't inflate my lungs. After I was released from the hospital, my parents shared with me their story when they spoke with the surgeon, and how the phone dropped and how they rushed to the hospital. In total, I was in the hospital for maybe 2 weeks. I couldn't be released right away because I still had trouble breathing. I was very underweight, so I was working with a dietitian, as well as my balance. I couldn't walk. I don't know what that was about to this day. But I recall I was working at the time, and I think the surgery happened on a Wednesday or Thursday. And I told my employer at the time, I said, "Oh, I'll be back on Monday." So I took maybe 2 days, 2 or 3 days off for the surgery. And I mentioned that I'll be back on Monday. That was not the case. I was off work for a total of about a month, give or take. Um, Before I was able to leave the hospital, I had to perform breathing exercises on my own, and in the front of the nurses or attendants, to ensure that I can breathe. There was this machine, or this handheld machine thing I had with a long tube that I had to insert in my mouth, that had a ball within it. So I had to move the ball from the lower point to the top point, and that's how, with my breath, to build up my lungs, I guess. I did that. Again, I work with a dietitian. I had to get weight on me and walk. Um, I didn't have balance, and I couldn't walk for a long time. I don't know, because the breathing as well, but I couldn't walk. So I had to walk within the hospital, from one end of the hall on the floor to the other end, and build my strength that way, and build my strength up that way as well. So that was a traumatic experience for me. And after I was released, my mom was encouraging me to return to Jehovah, um, and to return to the meetings. And I thought, I was aggressive. Yeah, Jehovah gave me a second chance, and I thought that was my way of showing my appreciation, or my gratitude to Jehovah. But that wasn't the case. Looking back, Jehovah never said that I had to be a Jehovah's Witness to serve him, or God never said I had to be a Jehovah's Witness to serve him or to please him. I'm good enough the way I am. But that would lead me, following me leaving the hospital and recuperating. A couple of months later, there was a memorial. My mother invited me to the memorial with her congregation, the congregation that I grew up in. Um, the sister who aided my mom into the organization, she asked me, it was a number of people there, sisters there, asking me, do I want a Bible study? I felt kind of pressure, but I agreed, because I thought that Jehovah gave me a second chance. So within a couple of days, she contacted someone in my territory, a sister who contacted me. And that's how my Bible study began, and later I became a Jehovah's Witness. But I noticed that, and I will share this, in my research, and just my experience within the organization, that we had a lot of people within the organization who came in with vulnerabilities, such as myself. I had a near-death experience. There are some there who and there's three categories there: been in the organization from birth through generation, grandparents or great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Then we have those who have had traumatic experiences, maybe drug addictions or abusive relationships. Then the last category that I've experienced are people coming into the organization, or who are in the organization. Some just want to, They believe in the hope of Jehovah's Witness, and that's why they're there. But I was in the category of having that vulnerable, that traumatic experience. I thought I was given a second chance, and I thought that this was the best way that I can show God that I appreciate Him and I loved Him. I love Him for giving me the second chance. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. We are good enough. I am good enough the way I am. I don't have to be a Jehovah's Witness or any other religion, a part of any other religion, to show God that I love Him and I appreciate Him for all that He's done for me. God reads my heart. So I don't have to be tied to an organization that I know is not right for me in order to prove my loyalty or my love to God. I hope this helps. I hope this addressed some of the questions that I received. I'll talk to you another time. Take care.